It started with a storm. The sky was thick with dark clouds, and rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against rooftops and windows. Thunder shook the ground, sending nervous pets hiding under beds and flickering power across small towns. In one old farmhouse at the edge of town, Stephanie sat alone, listening to the wind howl through the trees. The storm didn't usually scare her, but that night felt different. The air was heavy, charged, like something was waiting just beyond the darkness. She turned on her old radio, the one she kept in the kitchen. Static crackled before the familiar voice of the local DJ filled the room. The station was staying live through the storm, sharing updates and keeping lonely listeners company. To pass the time, the host opened the phone lines, inviting anyone awake to call in, to share a story, a memory, anything to fill the silence between the thunder. The first voice belonged to Stephanie herself. She admitted the storm made her uneasy, not because of the wind or rain, but because the house was too quiet. There was no one to talk to, no one to sit with her. Her voice was soft, with a kindness that made even the radio host lean closer to listen. A few minutes later, another call came in. This time, it was Nick, a man across the county, riding out the storm alone in his tiny upstairs apartment. He said storms didn't bother him much, but the silence afterward always did. The host invited Stephanie and Nick to talk to each other, just to pass the time. At first, the conversation was simple: weather, power outages, the way rain sounds different when you're alone. Then Stephanie asked what Nick could see from his window. Nick described the flickering streetlight outside, the way the water pooled in the cracks of the sidewalk. In return, Stephanie described the trees bending outside her kitchen window, branches swaying like they were dancing just to stay standing. Their voices filled the empty spaces between the storm's growls. That night, neither of them expected anything beyond the call. But the next week, the radio host opened the lines again, and Stephanie called. Then Nick. It became a pattern. Week after week, they called the station. They never planned it, but somehow they always ended up on the air together. They talked about childhood memories, Nick's first bike, Stephanie's family picnics by the lake. They shared stories of lost pets, embarrassing moments, and old dreams that never quite came true. They never exchanged last names. They didn't need to. There was comfort in the mystery, a kind of magic in knowing just a voice. No expectations, no judgments, only words and laughter drifting across the airwaves. As the years passed, the town's old radio station changed. New hosts came and went, but the voices of Stephanie and Nick remained. Listeners grew attached to them, two strangers who felt like old friends. Their calls became a tradition, something familiar in an unfamiliar world. But life isn't always kind. One week, Stephanie didn't call. Then another. The silence was louder than the storms they used to fill. Listeners wondered, some fearing the worst. Then, on a quiet Thursday night, Nick's voice returned to the air. His words were softer, slower, the weight of worry pressing into every syllable. He asked if anyone had heard from Stephanie. A week later, Stephanie's voice came back. Quieter, but still there. She'd been in the hospital, she explained. Nothing serious, just enough to keep her off the air. Nick said he was glad to hear her again. His voice cracked just a little, but neither of them said anything about it. Over time, their voices aged. They called less often, but when they did, it was like they had never left. Their stories grew softer, but the bond stayed strong. A connection built from nothing but sound and time. They never met in person. They never needed to. Nick knew Stephanie's laugh by heart. Stephanie could sense Nick's moods just from the way he said hello. In a world where everything felt rushed, where people met and forgot each other in seconds, they were something different. Proof that sometimes the strongest friendships don't need handshakes or photos, just the right words at the right time. No one knows how their story ends. Maybe the calls finally stopped, or maybe they simply faded into the background, two voices carried on the wind. But for everyone who listened, The night owls, the lonely hearts, the storm watchers who kept their radios on. They left something behind. A reminder that even in the darkest storms, a single voice can be enough to light the way. If you believe in unexpected connections, if you believe in stories that span decades, like and subscribe to hear more true stories that remind us how small moments can change everything.